All right, everybody, welcome back to the Glass Less Travel livecast. My name is Mike Verivi. I'm a certified bourbon steward and founder of the Fox Valley Whiskey Society. We're going to explore and introduce you to America's craft distilleries, microbreweries, industry insiders, and professional imbibers to give you the inside scoop on the things you need to be drinking. Guys, don't forget to hit like and subscribe down below. If you guys like what we're doing, you can also follow us and help support us on patreon.com/theglasslesstraveled. We are back tonight with our good friend, whiskey reviewer, writer, and blogger, Jeff Schwartz, a.k.a. WhiskeyFellow. Jeff,
Cheers.
Hello, good evening. And we've also got our resident Scotch know-it-all, Dan Greisen, with us there in the middle. We're going to be doing a live tasting tonight of a beautiful, unpeated Scotch. I'm not going to say the name yet. We'll say it. We'll say it later. But this is the bottle right here. The classic Laddie. So guys, let's start with a little bit of some history on the distillery. But first, Jeff, why don't you start with how you pronounce it?
The way that I've always heard it pronounced is Bruichladdich.
Dan, you?
Bruichladdich.
So I read Bruichladdich. So it's close. We're all kind of in the same ballpark.
We're all the same, from the same neighborhood in Scotland.
Right.
Jeff, what can you tell us that you know about Bruichladdich Distillery?
Okay, well, the first thing that I want to explain is it's one of 9 distilleries on Islay. And if you're going to pronounce it Islay or Islay or whatever, that's not the correct way to do it. So if you want to be in the know, Islay is the best way to pronounce that and not cause any offense. This distillery was established in 1881 and ran pretty much, it changed hands a bunch of times, but was shuttered in 1994 and then reopened in 2000. And this is a Terroir-specific distillery. They like to do a lot of experimentation. The distillery has 3 product lines. The first is Bruichladdich, which is their unpeated line. That's what we're going to be drinking tonight. They have a Port Charlotte line, which is lightly peated. And then they have the Big Bad Octomore series, which likes to compete with Ardbeg and some of the other Islay distilleries to be the biggest, baddest peated monsters that you'll ever come across. So that's my little brief history about them. What do you got on that?
So you guys know that watch this. I spent a long time kind of doing research. Scotch is really not my thing. It's not my forte. That's why we have Dan here. Dan knows more about Scotch than I do. Hopefully he can chime in at least on some of the tasting notes. So the distillery itself was, like you said, it was built in 1881 by the Harvey brothers, William, John, and Robert. The Harveys were a dynastic whiskey family that had owned 2 other distilleries since the 1770s. Using an inheritance, the 3 brothers combined their talents to build a 3rd distillery, which we call Bruichladdich, or Bruichladdich, which was designed by John, engineered by Robert, and then financed by William and other family members. At the time, the distillery was a state-of-the-art design, unlike Islay's older distilleries, which had developed from old farm buildings. Bruichladdich was built from stone by the sea and has a very efficient layout built around a large, spacious courtyard. Can you tell I'm getting any of this from Wikipedia? So it's and like you said, this is an Islay Scotch, but not one that you would typically find from Islay, in that it's not that like chewing on like a campfire almost. Mm-hmm. You know, this one is a lot softer, a lot milder, much fruitier, much more floral. Let's see, so let's move up here. Uniquely tall and narrow-necked stills were chosen to produce a very pure and original spirit, the opposite of the styles produced by the older form of distilleries. Bruichladdich was run by William Harvey after an argument with his brothers before the distillery was even completed until a fire in 1934 and William's death in 1936. Over the next 40 years, it subsequently changed owners several times, and as a result of corporate takeovers, the industry narrowly avoiding closure until 1994, when it was shut down as being, and I quote, surplus to requirements. So apparently Scotland already had enough Scotch, and they said, we don't need any more, which is never something that a Scotsman wants to hear. The distillery was unpurchased by a group of private investors in December of 2000. Jim McEwen, who worked at Bowmore Distillery since the age of 15, was hired as master distiller and production director. Between January and May of 2001, the whole distillery was dismantled and reassembled with the original Victorian decor and equipment retained. Having escaped modernization, most of the original Harvey machinery is still in use today. No computers are used in the production, and the entire process is controlled by a pool of skilled artisans who pass on information orally and largely measure progress using dipsticks and simple flotation devices. So there's really no technology used at this distillery at all. This is, I mean, obviously there's computers and stuff that are used in the, sure, in the office buildings, but in the actual distillery, this is about as old and rugged as it gets, which is very interesting, especially in modern day.
Well, when you think about it, you know, you've got somebody wants to say craft and you know, handmade. You don't get any closer to that than this.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and this was, I mean, to see pictures, and we can post some to the Facebook page, but just to Google some of the pictures of this place is absolutely beautiful. All, like you had mentioned, Jeff, a little bit ago, all the distillery's whiskeys are sold as single malts, with those being designated, Bruichladdich being unpeated. They designate Port Charlotte as being heavily peated, and those designated Octomore being super heavily peated. And Octomore is considered to be the most heavily peated single malt whiskey in the world. So that one really is kind of truly like chewing on a campfire. The distillery itself moved to full production in 2013, 1 year after being purchased by Remy Cointreau. All barley used is exclusively Scottish, some of which has been grown on Islay since 2004. The provenance of the barley used is extremely important philosophically, and this increasingly reflects the marketing and presentation of the product range. Individual farms, farmers, and even the fields in which the grain is grown are identified on the packaging where possible. Fun fact, and this is where we'll get into the tasting, Classic Laddie is a non-age stated, and Dan actually told me this, but by the UPC, if you have a bottle at home, by the UPC or on the front of the bottle, there is a 5-digit code. Mine it's 2 digits, a slash, and then 3 digits. So mine is 14.
Mine is laser coded on.
Yours is laser coded on?
Yeah,
so
right
mine is right here up front.
Yeah.
So you can actually go to their website, type in that code, and it will tell you everything about that particular batch. So that's kind of interesting. I didn't know. Dan showed me that one. I didn't know you could do that. So I looked mine up a little bit earlier. Mine was a blend of 67 casks from four different barrel styles and 2 different malt styles. Yeah. So it's interesting to see what it was made up of.
And one of the things that I'm not an expert in Scotch, so I got to clarify that. I just really like drinking it. Most of my research comes at the end of the night after drinking, and I get curious about the stuff. So my memory might be a bit foggy, but like one of the things that as you look through what makes up each Bruichladdich, or however you want to pronounce it, you see a lot of, like, there's a ton of different barrel types, and I'm not going to try to attempt the name of the new owners that took over in 2000, but I know they have a wine background, and that's where a lot of the terroir that Jeff talked about, they brought that into the distillery. So you see a lot more wine finished barrels going into their bottles too. So I'm just going through mine, and I see a lot of, there's bourbon, there's sherry, there's all those other ones that you typically see, but a lot of wine bottles are, there's Cabernet Sauvignon barrel, and a red Burgundy barrel. So I found that like extremely interesting that they brought their approach to wine into distilling whiskey, and how can they, make that, combine the two to create such a wonderful spirit. And cheers. I think they've done a good job.
It'll be interesting to see when we get to actually nosing and tasting how much of that, if any of that, if that wine actually comes out. Jeff, why don't you walk us through your process? So I already poured my glass, but why don't you walk us through your process? And again, folks, if you guys have this at home, this is the Bruichladdich Scottish barley, or the classic Laddie. It's that beautiful aqua green color. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head what I bought this for. I want to say it was between that like $50 and $60, maybe $70 range, somewhere around there, which for most
retail on that is supposed to be about 56.
Okay. So it was somewhere in that area. This was about a year ago that I ended up picking up this bottle. I don't sip on Scotch very often. So this is going to be a treat tonight to be here with you guys, and especially with Jeff to kind of walk us through what we can expect on the palate.
I know a place you can get it. I know a place you can get it for 45. But
that'll be our little secret.
Yeah,
get a case of it.
Woodman's.
So,
yeah.
Before we get started, I want to add a little bit more trivia to this. Not a lot, but one of the things with Scotch is legally you can add caramel coloring to it, and this is natural colored. It's also non-chill filtered, which is a big deal to a lot of people right now. But one of the more interesting things about this is 50% alcohol. So 50 ABV. That is very high for a Scotch. A lot of Scotches come in at 40, 42, 46. To have them come up at 50 and not be cask strength it's not rare, but it's unusual. So when you consider that you're spending $56 on this to get, for us, 100 proof Scotch, that's a hell of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, only if
Jeff,
you taste it.
Jeff, I had a question. I don't know if you know, but I had heard this, and I don't know it to be true. But I heard that it comes off their stills at about 68 ABV, and they go directly into the barrel without cutting it at all. Because what I heard is they said they age spirits, not water. I don't know if that's just a rumor or if that's something that's true. I don't know of many whiskey distilleries that would not add something. I'm sure the accountants wouldn't appreciate that, but
I find it difficult to believe that they're not proofing it down. And the reason that I say that is this is 100 proof. And you would have to be extraordinarily lucky to have this come out of the barrel unplanned at 100 proof every time.
No, I mean, they proof it down after, but they put it into the barrel before aging, so the new make goes into the barrels uncut.
Oh, that's not overly unusual, especially when you consider that Scotch ages differently than, say, bourbon or rye. Bourbon or rye, typically, the longer it ages, the more it increases in proof. Scotch is the opposite because of their climate. The longer it ages, it tends to drop in proof. So, that part wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Okay. See?
Good question. Good question.
Just a guy that likes to drink Scotch.
That's right. Cheers.
I see my buddy, it comes up as Facebook user on the screen. I've got my wife behind here. That's our buddy, Brandon Morris. So hello, Brandon. We actually got to meet Brandon not this past weekend, the weekend prior, up at Journeyman. He came on to a little virtual pub that we did, and he just kept coming back, and now we're all like one big happy whiskey family. So hello, Brandon. So he says it's non-peated, so no smoke flavor. We'll get into it in a minute. It's kind of hard to explain, with this one, that there's no smoke flavor, because even even with smelling it, you can still kind of get a little bit. It's like that. I think it's just that quintessential Scotch kind of flavor that just, regardless of whether or not you used, you dry the barley with smoked peat, I feel like it still, comes through a little bit of, ashy or smoky flavor. So let's, without further ado, unless anybody has anything else to add,
and keep in mind they run the spirit. They run Octomore and Port Charlotte through the exact same mash tuns, exact same washbacks, exact same stills. So they can clean it all they want. There might just be a little bit left over. Some of that, it's not all steel. Some of it's wood.
Well, and it's in the air too. So I mean, it's bound to happen. But it's all the germinating process of the barley, and to do that, you have to heat it in various ways. And they choose with Bruichladdich to not use peat moss to dry that. Burning the peat moss is what gives the smoky, ashy flavor. But again, as you've pointed out, it's still in the air because it's still coming out of the same distillery.
Yep.
So some of it is bound to come into the, if not the new make, then at least the barrels.
Well, I'm looking forward to sipping on this one. So, Jeff, walk us through your what is it, your 4 steps.
So the first thing I like to do is, some people consider this a trivial thing. Some people give it some credence, but I like to look at the rim and the legs that the Scotch leaves on the glass. And it's kind of hard to see in here, but I would describe this as a medium thick rim, which tends to lead to more water content in there. So they may have proofed this down quite a bit from where it was. It's got thicker legs as well, but this is going to suggest that there's quite a bit of body to it also. You want to take a look at the color, admire the color. This is a honey color. It's not what I would consider an amber like you get in a lot of bourbons or ryes. It's much lighter, but again, it's naturally colored though. And to have something naturally colored like this, Scotches that are not artificially colored tend to be a lot lighter than this. But again, they're using a whole bunch of different barrels and some are going to be first fill, second fill, third fill, and that's going to give all sorts of different color to the whiskey itself. But I like to go through 3 different nosing areas to pick up the various flavors. And what I like to do is I like to start off at chin level. And if you open your mouth and inhale through your nose, you should be able to pick up various flavors or various smells in this. And for instance, I'm picking up a lot of floral notes, a lot of citrus, and you're sniffing by your ear, so that's good.
Well, Dina always jokes around. She's like, "What is it? What does it sound like?" But someone just said it's the color of Mike's beard. So yeah, there we. It's a little.
Sounds like the ocean. It must be from Isla.
Yeah.
And drink out of a conch shell.
Then I like to bring it to lip level, and again repeat the process. Getting a lot more honey over here.
Yeah, a lot more honey.
And then I like to bring it up to just under my nostrils. I don't stick my nose in the glass, but like to bring it up just under my nostrils. And again, mouth open, do the inhaling. I'm getting a lot of chocolate at that point. And again, this can all differ batch to batch to batch because all these batches are different. But I'm getting a lot of milk chocolate off of this, which is very pleasant to me.
You get like a almost like a dried fruit, almost like a dried orange or like a dried apricot or something like that.
Yeah, there's definitely citrus in it.
You're
getting a lot of what?
Citrus in this one.
When at the nose, I get more of the ocean, the sea salt.
Yeah,
the
that's salty
brininess.
air.
But do you,
Didn't
you
get
see
that
how,
down
or
here.
you smell how there's
Yeah.
actually three different
Yeah.
zones here in front of your face, and it makes
Yeah.
a huge difference.
I got a little
So the
down
last
low by the
way-
chin. What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last
Down by the
way
chin, I got more of the
is-
honey.
Yeah, I get a lot of honey more closer to the mouth, but again, that could be
Yeah.
just the batch difference. The last thing I like to do is hold it up to my lips and inhale through my mouth instead of my nose, because you're still smelling this time through your mouth, and you can pick up other flavors that you weren't picking up before. For me, in this batch, it picks up a lot of iodine and seaweed, which is very, very common in an Isla whiskey and a lot of Highland whiskeys that are oceanside distilleries.
You said iodine. I get like a little hint of that.
Yeah, it would be very unusual not to pick up either or both iodine and seaweed in any Isla Scotch. It would be an exception to the rule.
So now that we've smelled it with I know, like with bourbon, I like to let mine sit a little bit. I like to let it air out a little bit. I'll usually try it right away just to see what it's, what that punch is going to be like. But then I like to let it sit for a couple minutes and then visit it again and then let it sit for a couple more minutes. With something like Scotch, would you still use that same method, or is it, because it's so much more kind of floral and softer, would you say no, let's just go for it?
I do everything letting it rest at least 10 to 15 minutes before I bring it to my mouth to taste. I'll enjoy the smell in the room. Some of these whiskeys are a lot more fragrant than others, and it's amazing if you're patient, the things you can just pick up in the air with the glass 2 feet away from your face.
Yeah. I have noticed that, and I have 2 fans going in this right now because it gets so hot in here.
Sure.
I'm sure everything is just getting blown away. So I have to dig a little bit deeper to pick it up. But normally, you're right. I'll have it on my bedside table, or I'll have it on the table next to the couch, and Dina will be able to smell it, especially if it's something like a Lagavulin or an Ardbeg or an Octomore. It just kind of fumigates the whole room. Even some bourbons, some sherry cask finish, Madeira cask finish bourbons, you kind of get some of that sweeter, some of those sweeter cherry notes that'll come out. Scotch, I don't. This one, I don't know. I would be able to pick up from afar as easily as I would its older brother Octomore.
No, this would be more, if anything that you're going to pick up, it's going to be floral notes.
Yeah. It'll
smell almost like a nice version of a room freshener.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but I want to dive into this.
So let's go in it. And I mean, Scotch, same thing as bourbon, same thing as rye. You want to do that Kentucky chew. Get it all in your mouth first. Don't worry about what it tastes like the first time. It's going to be palate shock. The flavors that you're going to want to look for are after the first sip.
Yeah, for being this one's interesting because I drink a lot of, and Dan knows this, I drink a lot of high proof bourbon. So my palate, the science there is very interesting as to why your tongue burns, but we'll get into that at another time. I think we actually might have already talked about that at some point in one of these episodes, but your tongue kind of gets used to that burn of the higher proof bourbons. This one, for being 50%, it's much higher proof than most Scotch that I've tried, or at least that I've been aware of. I have had some bottled and bond bourbon that does not burn or give me that heat or that tickly tongue quite like this does, which is kind of interesting.
It is, but I mean, if you go to something like a Knob Creek 120, I can't tell you how many of those do not drink like 120 proof at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that I notice out of this is this has a very thick, heavy mouthfeel.
Yes.
Unlike, again, a lot of scotches can be very light and airy, and this is light and airy, but also creamy, and it's got some weight to it as well. And it's a really, you think that these are opposite descriptions, but they kind of blend in together.
Dan, what do you think on this one?
I mean, I agree. If you're looking at a non-peated Islay whiskey, so you still got all the elements of Islay there. It's still aged on the island. It still takes on all those components. It's aged by the sea. It's beaten by the weather. If you're trying to compare this to like a light and fruity Highlands malt, it's going to be completely opposite. The mouthfeel is 100% different. The experience is different. It's just, I think it's a gorgeous whiskey, and it's a great way for people to get introduced to Islay. I was there. I personally started out as not liking peated whiskeys at all. I hated them. Bruichladdich 12 actually got me introduced to Islay, another non-peated or lightly peated Islay whiskey. And friends of mine told me to keep trying, and I did. And now I love them. But there's something about this that it screams Islay. Even though the peat's not there, people will drink this who don't know anything about it and say, "Oh, there's peat there. There's peat in that. I get it." I mean, and I just think it's the elements of the island that go into an Islay whiskey that's part of the experience. So anyone who's had a highly peated whiskey tastes a lot of the same flavors. If you have an Ardbeg 10, it's very similar, and it's very fruity and very citrusy and very floral, but there's peat there that you got to get through. Once you get through the peat, you're drinking a pretty similar, different, but similar, flavor profile.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, there's only so much you can, we're drinking single malts. So there's only so much you can do with the barley. Everything winds up being, if you're having it unpeated, what's coming out of the cask? And you're going to have so much influence out of the air around you and from the wood itself. And, with Scotch, most of it is aged in used cooperage versus bourbon and American rye, which is always new.
Yeah. And I believe, again, one of my late night research, Bruichladdich is currently, or at the time, which was about a 3-year-old piece of information I had about 200 different types of wood casks in their warehouses. So, I mean, they've got everything. I mean, everything under the sun from wood, they're using it and putting it into the mastery behind the scenes to make their expressions is just goes to show you how difficult it is to be a blender and how expert they are at it. So,
well, and again, it's I may have said this in our previous episode that we did. One thing I love when I do blind tastings is to have somebody come up to me and say, "All I drink is single malt," and you are automatically a target, because at the end of that night, you are going to have a much different opinion than when you came in with. Making a single malt is, when I say it's easy, it's not any schmuck can come up and, distill and have something come out. You need to know what you're doing. But making a single malt is easy. The art form is blending.
Yeah.
And in the case of my batch here, this is 47 different barrels that they've got going. And, to blend that and to come up with something, A, that's palatable, and B, that turns out right, you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
They're not just tossing these together and say, let's see what happens.
And,
now, I'm sure that does happen with some people, but not with the pros.
Yeah.
Well, I have 86 casks in mine.
Yeah. See, I think mine is 67 in mine, but it's interesting because, with bourbon, you've got something like, we'll use Booker's, for example, which is, it's small batch. but there could be as many as 2, 3, 350, 400 barrels in a batch, which after talking to all these people doing this, you find is actually a lot easier to create a single flavor profile rather than using something like maybe Starlight Distillery down in Indiana, which might only use 4, 5, or 6 barrels. But when you add in there for the Scotch distilleries all of the different cooperages and all of the different barrels that they're getting, you have this additional variable. So yeah, there might be 67 barrels, but 40 of the, or 20 of those might be wine barrels, 10 of them might be bourbon barrels, some of them might be this or that or the other. So you've got all these different variables, and to blend this to any kind of consistency is mastery, to say the least.
Yeah, and I don't even know that they go for consistency, although it's interesting that we've come up with similar notes. And I'm willing to bet that we're drinking from 3 different batches.
Yeah, I know Mike and I have different batches.
Yeah, Dan and I have different batches.
Mine's 2015.
Mine was 14.
Mine is a 14 also. My batch is 14009.
Mine is 14167.
Okay. I
So
probably have the oldest one. This is January 25th of 2014.
Yeah, mine is June 19th of 14.
Yeah, mine's 1502. I need my readers.
So yours is one of the first batches out of 2015.
Mine is I forgot my reader, so I got the first 2. That's it.
Now that I let this sit for a little bit, I'm getting like an apple, or a red apple almost.
Yeah, let's talk about what we're doing. So, I mean, up front for me at the front of the palate with this one, I'm getting, strange as this may seem, both wet and dry oak, which isn't overly common. But the dry oak is a little spicier, and the wet oak is, musky is not the right word, but it's something along that line. Towards the middle on mine, sweet fruit, and in particular, apples and grapes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in the back, I'm getting honey and then a lot of nut. So cashews, almonds, pecans. That's what's coming up in mine, and I'm not even hitting the finish here yet. What are you guys getting?
You said cashew is interesting because if I think about chewing on a cashew, I get a little bit of that, like that soft butteriness that you would typically get from a cashew. But it's like right back here.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty soon. I don't get the wet oak. I get maybe a little bit of the dry oak, a little bit of spices. I get some apple. I don't get grape, but I'm probably, that might come from, I might not have as many white wine cask finishes as yours. That might be where the grape's coming from, but
sure.
Yeah, when Mike describes chewing it, I can see the cashew. I don't necessarily wouldn't know if I'd relate it to that, but I get that. It's definitely it has a definite evolution of flavors that it's going through across your palate.
Do you guys get cinnamon?
Well, and keep in mind some of this is subliminal suggestion.
Yeah.
So
right.
I don't get cinnamon. I get maybe more of a white pepper. So
okay.
See, I'm getting a white pepper on the finish.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you mentioned the pepper, though. I'm getting a white pepper on the finish. I'm getting honey. The one thing that I'm getting that a lot of people don't like, I don't mind it, is that astringent flavor. Some people will call it like chewing on Band-Aids. It's not very strong, but it's there.
It's real faint in the background, and it's actually interesting you mentioned that because there's there's a science behind that, behind why a lot of people actually will taste Band-Aids when they drink Scotch. It's very similar to the way that some people like cilantro and some people don't like cilantro. To some people, it tastes like soap. It's actually a gene that gets turned on that basically makes cilantro taste like soap. But I also read that it's a very similar thing when it comes to Scotch and Band-Aids. It's just that's just the gene that you have that kind of makes it that way. And I get that a little real faint, way on the back.
It's small.
Yeah,
it's small, but I mean it's also a taste that's like peat. It's something that you have to grow accustomed to and appreciate. At first it turns off people, and peat tends to turn off people.
Yeah.
But as they slowly work their way into it, it becomes more palatable, and suddenly you're craving it.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear what everybody out there on YouTube and Facebook. We've got the Silver Lock Whiskey Club. I know we got Brandon here with us, and a few other people. I'm curious if you guys were able to pick up a bottle of the classic Laddie, or what you guys are sipping on tonight. Feel free to comment. I'm sure one of the three of us have been able to experience the same thing you guys are drinking tonight.
We missed it, but I saw the Silver Lock Whiskey Club. It said they were drinking an Indian whiskey, I believe. I forgot which one it was.
Yeah, so here, I'll put that one back on. So Silver Lock Whiskey Club, the Rampur Double Cask.
I've not had that. There are some excellent Indian single malts. Very amazing. And part of that is due to the extreme heat that they have down there. In a lot of the areas where the distillation is happening, average temperature is 98 degrees. And interesting thing about, not to get too sidetracked here, interesting thing about Indian distilleries is they're pretty new to understanding distilling, particularly aging. And they used to, not so many years ago, wind up finding a lot of bodies in the rickhouses because they didn't understand that all the alcohol vapor is in the air, and because it's so hot there all the time, so permeative in the air, that people will asphyxiate themselves, and they keel over and die because there's no oxygen to breathe. They're just breathing alcohol vapor. And they'd come out and they'd find these bodies in there. Well, now they know to ventilate. But they didn't before. And we're not talking about a whole long time ago either.
Right.
It's a difficult lesson to learn, but a great way to go, I guess.
It is. And I mean, stuff there ages so fast. In 5 years, that's probably equivalent to a dozen or more in an American distillery, just because of the heat that's involved.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I mean, you talked earlier about it, how American whiskeys, as they age, they increase in proof. As Scotch single malts age, they decrease. There you've got a single malt that's probably increasing in ABV as it's aging. So it's kind of like you're getting both.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I've had some
absolutely
Paul John that's just phenomenal stuff. So
Amrut makes some fantastic stuff, and so does Paul John. And there's Indian whiskey is like Canadian whiskey; it's unregulated, so you can have a lot of things that's not really whiskey, more closer to rum in a lot of things, or more closer to something else entirely. But the big distillers out there that are legitimate's not a good word, but I think it gets the point across. They know what they're doing. They're doing this in a Scotch tradition, and they're making it right, and they're figuring out, not to overage things and pull it when it's ready.
Silver Lock Whiskey Club mentioned that the angel share in India is between 10 and 12%, which is huge. But it's because
I buy that in a second.
Yeah, and knowing what the average temperature is, there, that's absolutely believable. I'm curious, because I've never had a an Indian whiskey in comparison to a Scotch, which is what I would assume is the closest relatable thing to it. What are the biggest differences that you guys, and maybe Silver Lock Whiskey Club, maybe you can chime in on this as well, because I've never had an Indian whiskey. I don't know about you, Dan. I'm sure Jeff, you have. What's the biggest? What are we looking at?
An Indian whiskey, to me, an Indian single malt, a good one, is going to be a lot closer to a bourbon than it will be to a Scotch.
Really?
Even though the grains are different, you're getting a lot of caramel out of it. You're getting a lot of there is some smokiness, even if it's not peated, that comes out of the wood, but you're getting some bold flavors. And they have some, like Paul John has a couple peated versions of their whiskey, and they can do that. But to me, an Indian whiskey is a bourbon drinker Scotch, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think with the heat, you get so much more wood interaction. So it depends on the barrels they use too. If they're using ex-bourbon, you're going to get all that bourbon flavor as well. So I have a few mics, so you can try mine.
So Mark Augustin, good friend and actually longtime one of our founding members of the Fox Valley Whiskey Society, and usually watches every Wednesday with us. Hello, Mark. Thanks for tuning in again. He says, to my understanding, the owners of Bruichladdich also own Westland. Do you think this relationship is helping Westland in their development of the American single malt whiskey category?
I'm going to claim ignorance on this. I don't know that it's the same owner. If it is, I would say it makes sense because it's to their benefit to share knowledge, but I have no idea if it's the same owners or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And I do know Westland is really one of the driving forces right now with a couple other major distilleries trying to create laws and guidelines as to what the category actually is and give it some definition. But right now American single malt has very little to make it very little rules to play by. So
now I will tell you this much: Westland makes the best American peated malt I've ever had.
I would agree.
I don't know that I've ever had anything from Westland. Silver Lock Whiskey Club, yes. Westland and Bruichladdich are owned by the same owners, and that's it. It's interesting to kind of see where we in 1964 was when bourbon was kind of given its proper definition. It's going to be curious to see as we kind of go on with these craft distillers and these smaller distillers, micro distilleries, creating this American single malt category and kind of really defining what it is, to see what happens with that in the coming decade or so. It's something it's growing. We're starting to see a little bit more of it. I actually think I believe I picked up a single malt from Journeyman this past weekend, which is very, very good. But let's go back to the Bruichladdich. What did we talk about the finish? Did we get into the finish? Because I already poured myself a second glass.
we touched on it briefly. I had explained that my batch is white pepper and honey, and then it's got that Band-Aid astringent quality to it. But one thing I want to see if your batch is the same as mine. Every time I take a sip of this, it's slightly different.
Yes, slightly. It almost gets more. I don't want to say. I think viscous is the wrong word, but it has it almost has that very full mouth feel, but it gets sweeter. Each sip I take is more. I get more and more honey.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
It almost feels like you're sipping on a honey water almost.
Yeah, I added a couple drops of water to mine, and I prefer it neat as opposed to with water, but it does change it quite a bit. Like I got a lot more sweetness with the water. But yeah, I'm going back to without water.
Oh, I mean, there's not too many whiskeys that I try that evolve with every sip. You know, in the beginning, you kind of expect that once you get past palate shock, but from that point on, it gets pretty consistent, sip after sip after sip. This is changing I'm on one pour here, and I've probably sipped this 6 times, and I'm tasting 6 different things.
Yeah.
Go back and re-nose it and tell me if it tastes different or smells different. Because maybe it's just because it's my second glass and it doesn't have water in it, but I'm getting a different experience on the nose.
I'm not, but that could be your batch.
Yeah. I don't have as much floral and citrus on it. But
if anybody watching it right now is sampling along with us, I'd love to hear what you guys think of this one, what you guys are picking up. Yeah, the nose. I mean, this is now going on my third pour. I think I drink faster than you guys.
But you're used to cask strength, so this is only 50 ABV. You're good.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. See, I get like red apple. It like red apple and honey.
Yeah.
On the nose. This is one of those. I think this is a good Scotch to get people that maybe didn't know if they would like it. Maybe remember trying something in their grandfather's basement when they were kids, or sipping on something, at a wedding years and years ago, and that you didn't like. I think this would be kind of a good transition because of how fruity and how floral it is. I think this would be a really, really good segue into, going from bourbon or rye into Scotch. Actually, this would be a better segue from going from rye to Scotch, because I get that fruitiness, that pepper on the back. This is a really good transition. And Doug,
I would agree with that assessment. This could be a very good introduction for especially a rye drinker into Scotch, because there's a lot of similar qualities here, the floral notes, the spice notes, as you mentioned. But it's also it also is bold, and this is not an 80 proof. That's not an 80 proof
Right.
Scotch.
Right.
This is 100 proof Scotch, which is going to be more in line of what the average rye is. Hitting into the 90s and hundreds. This is going to be closer like that. I think you've made a very good point with that.
It's just that every time you bring the glass up, and the first thing I think of is like a Rittenhouse, almost like a Rittenhouse rye, or like a Pinhook. A Pinhook would be a good example. I just get that fruity, floral, not.
Yeah, you don't. It doesn't have a bourbon nose at all.
No. Yeah, this
No,
one.
but a bourbon drinker would appreciate the proof.
Yeah, and I think there's probably it's very light, but there's caramel, a little bit of vanilla in it as well. So I think a bourbon drinker would latch on to those flavor profiles, but they are hidden behind, the florals and the citrus and some of the other elements.
And I mean, the fact that this is, granted, there are peated bourbons out there. I'm not familiar if there's peated ryes. I'm sure there are. But there's no peat in this. So again, it's bold enough to where this can attract an American whiskey drinker without turning them off of the things that typically Scotch would turn somebody off on.
Yeah. Also, if you guys, Mark, Brandon, Silverlock Whiskey Club, anybody else who's watching out there, we've got quite a few viewers tonight going on. What would you guys recommend for maybe like a good transition from bourbon into Scotch, or from rye into Scotch? This one for $55-$60 is a it's a great purchase. I actually one of the reviews that I was reading, I think it said this is perfect for sitting down with family at a campfire, or it's perfect for sitting down with family around the dinner table. And I agree, because it's very well balanced. It's super mild. It doesn't kind of punch you in the gut like a lot of those peated Scotch as well. So this is an interesting one, but I'd be curious to hear what you guys out there. We've got about 10 minutes left. We're gonna call a hard finish at 8 p.m. Jeff has a long drive tomorrow, which hopefully I hope you make safe. We'll be thinking about you. But I'm curious as to the listeners out there and the viewers out there, what you guys would recommend, or what you guys are sipping on tonight. That might be a good transition from bourbon into Scotch. Dan, what would you say? You've got a pretty vast.
I've always heard, and I would probably agree, a Glenfiddich 14 is a really good bourbon drinker's Scotch. Mm-hmm. It's a nice, easy drink. Glenfiddich is a really good distillery. It's got some of those typical notes you would find. It's with the bourbon with some barrel influence and some caramel and vanillas in there. That's one that I have on my shelf that I always like to pull out when people are, bourbon drinkers that want to try a Scotch, and they seem to accept it. I would, it's easier to stay in the mainland. I mean, Bruichladdich is a phenomenal whiskey. I love Bunnahabhain 12, but sometimes those Islay whiskeys, even the non-peated ones, are a little bit different in flavor profile than a bourbon drinker would. So anything in the Highland space sides is usually a good option to go to. But Glenfiddich 14 is one I've often recommended to people.
Strange as this is going to sound, generally when I've got a bourbon drinker who's new to Scotch, I like to send them to Lowland, Auchentoshan, something like that, because you get, granted it's still malted barley, but you get some of the vanillas and caramels are a little heavier there. You get some fruitiness in there, and it's not a bourbon per se, but it appeals to a lot of bourbon drinkers.
Yeah, it's such a forgotten Scotch region. Was there like 2 or 3 distilleries left down in Lowlands?
I think there's more than that,
especially
if you consider Glengoyne, which is right on the border. The distillery itself is Highland. The Rick House is Lowland. They're that far. Yeah, they're that close to the border. But there's not a whole lot of lowland distilleries, but what the whiskeys have to offer is a lot of what bourbon drinkers seek, particularly wheated bourbons.
Oh, okay.
I would say almost, and this is one that kind of actually got me into Scotch, would be the Balvenie. Specifically the Caribbean cask.
That's my favorite expression of theirs.
Yeah, that one, which I actually have behind me, it keeps going up and up and up and up in price, and I'm like, oh god, it's a really good one. It's one of my favorites. But the Balvenie is I think it's 14 years old. Caribbean cask, finished in rum casks. That's excellent whiskey. Great transition and a great whiskey, just in general.
And I think that's about a $70 bottle right now.
I've seen it for about 70 at most places. Some places I've seen it as high as almost $100 a bottle, and I just kind of walk right by it. If I see it on the shelf,
I would not pay $100 for that, but I'd pay $70 for it all day long. $70
all day. Silverlock Whiskey Club, Glenmorangie 10 or Quinta Ruban are good scotches to try. Glenmorangie is it's another one. The Astar, Glenmorangie Astar, is a beautiful, beautiful whiskey that is a really, really good transition into bourbon, or from bourbon even into Scotch. Just very light, very floral and fruity, and kind of hits all the notes.
That's my fun fact.
Go ahead.
My fun fact: the Quinta Ruban is my first Scotch I ever bought. So,
I was going to say, I would think that the Quinta Ruban, the older version, is closer to a bourbon drinker's Scotch than the newer.
That one, I haven't had. Mark Augustin, I really enjoyed the limited edition New Riff Backsetter, which is a peated bourbon and rye. It was met with mixed reviews, but I thought the rye one was great. Mark, actually, Dan, you were there. we tried the Backsetter bourbon. I don't know if it was the bourbon and the rye. I think we tried the bourbon at a bottle.
Probably had them both.
Was it both? Yeah,
we had both.
I didn't.
Or I was seeing double.
There could be. Yeah, we had a lot. We had a lot to pass around. We had the peated, the bourbon and the rye. I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't really care for. Not that they were bad. I just didn't care for either one of them. To me, I think it's more of a novelty than it is something that somebody's going to seek out on the shelf and buy over and over again. I think it's just one of those, we wanted to try doing this to see if it works. But it was definitely good. It was definitely very, very interesting to try what a bourbon and a rye would taste like with peat.
And I've never had a peated rye before. I've had peated bourbons. To me, they're very interesting. But bourbons in their own right can be smoky without the peat. So again, I'm with you. That's more of a novelty. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say that to insult anybody who just loves the stuff. Right. I enjoy it, but I can't see myself. If it was there, I would order it just because it's different. Mm-hmm. But I can't see myself seeking out. Oh my gosh, I've got to have a peated bourbon.
Right. It was definitely fun to drink. It was really awesome to try it. It was certainly interesting. It wasn't as and Mark, I think you would agree. It wasn't as peaty as honestly as I was expecting it to be. I almost you can get it right on the front of the palate, but it's not so profound that it's like, oh man, this is a peated whiskey. It was very faint, but again, once it hits the palate, it's like, oh, I know it's there, because you know what you're looking for.
I would give it a bar recommendation.
So I know we're running out of time here, but a good smoked rye, not peated, but smoked, which gives you something kind of sort of similar. Don't know if you guys have had Blaum Brothers straight rye, but that's a smoked rye.
I don't.
Okay.
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's one to definitely try. And in fact, that was my 2019 whiskey of the year.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. And that's
it's a 4-year-old, and it's their standard rye
that you can find on the shelf.
Yeah, it runs you about $50, and I've just been in love with it. And it's everything I imagined that a peated rye would be, but it's not ashy. It's just smoky.
Yeah, that's one that I'll definitely have to search out. Guys, we're at 58 minutes, so I want to thank you both for coming on. Jeff, I know you have got to hit the hay early. Dan will stay on and chat for a little bit after we end the live stream. I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight and watches each week. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe on YouTube. You can also help us expand by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/theglasslesstraveled and following us on Facebook and Instagram. I am actually working on turning this into a podcast so that if you can't watch, you can at least listen. So we're definitely working on that and seeing what we can do with that. I will be back next week with the lovely Miss Avalon Una from Catoctin Creek in Virginia. So we will be talking some more craft distilling with them next Wednesday. Jeff, anything before we log off?
No, man, I love this, and I'm looking forward to our next episode on this, whatever that might wind up being.
think we already lost Mike.
Yeah,
No,
I think Mike already logged off early. Wait,
I hit the
Mike's
wrong
he's done.
I'm back. I'm here.
He's
I
like,
hit the
anything
mouse,
else, and I'm
I
done.
think I logged I kicked myself out.
That's okay. And what I was saying is I'm looking forward to our next episode of this. We've agreed to do this about once a month.
Yeah.
And, whatever that might be, and if somebody has some suggestions, I'm open to pretty much anything.
And I think what we're going to do next time around is we're going to get a whiskey novice, somebody from the community to come on with us, somebody that might not know very much about tasting or nosing or what the palate is like, something a little interesting. So we'll get a whiskey novice to come on with us, somebody either from the group or from the community that watches. So if you guys are interested in joining us, if you're a whiskey novice, just comment on here or go to our Facebook page and let us know. We have a post up. Dan, anything before before we log off? I'll chat with you for a little bit after we're gone.
No, I just had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to transition now to a little of their,
little bit.
Oh, nice, very nice.
Some more of the
for the rest of the night.
I'm going to transition back to bourbon.
Bourbon.
I'm gonna transition to bed.
Go to bed, Jeff. You have a long drive tomorrow.
Everybody, thank you so much. And this was a lot of fun. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, cheers, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.